Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, students. Today we are going over the second lecture in plant science, which is plant naming, and then what is a plant? What are we seeing of plants? So today, let's go over plants and scientific naming and like the makeup. So today we are going to, in the second part of the lecture, talk about the naming convention from Carl Linnaeus. He created a binomial naming system. Binomial means two parts to a scientific name. They're in Latin, so the name like Zea mays, the scientific name for corn, it has two parts, Zea and maize. In this lecture, be able to recognize scientific names, know the historical uses of plants, know who Carl Linnaeus is, know the biological order, and know how to use the biological order, like in the backward reference to the Latin name, which that will make sense at the end of the lecture. So in this lecture, make sure you've read Stern Chapter 2, pages 11 to 26, Stern Chapter 16, 275 to 290. So first, we're going to ask, before we ask ourselves what's in the name, first, let's see what we're naming. So, what are you seeing in this picture? You're seeing a plant, right? It could be any kind of a house plant. But what are you also seeing? You're seeing a group of cells, atoms, molecules, all working together and being placed and arranged to make up a plant. So plants are made up of, just like you and I, of cells. Cells are a basic structural unit of organisms. They are bounded by a cell membrane. Cytoplasm is inside that cell membrane, which is the interior cell matrix. The cells will have a nucleus, which houses the DNA, and have a cell wall in plants. Human cells don't have cell walls. Plants do, and that's what makes a plant so well structured, is a thick cell wall. Molecules are organized into compartments and membranes and other structure within cells. Arrangements of molecules are highly structured and complex. Plants, just like any kind of an organism, in order for an organism to live out many generations and live for a long time, that organism must live, reproduce, and carry on an offspring, because organisms don't live forever. So as organisms grow, they have an increase, like plants have an increase in mass accompanied by an increase in volume. Results form production of new cells and variation. Growth is controlled by genetic makeup and the environment. Plants, just like any other organism, in order to stay alive, will need to reproduce and create offspring to carry on that species. Plants can reproduce by seeds very commonly, and also plants can reproduce vegetatively, which means a plant part can grow a whole new plant. We'll talk a lot about that in the propagation, but it's cool. There are some plants you can cut off a piece of that plant, put it in the soil, and it'll grow. That doesn't work for all plants, but it works for some. Response to stimuli and metabolism. Plants will respond to the environment. So plants respond to stimuli like injury, light, temperature, and gravity. A great example is if there was not a lot of rain this summer or next summer, plants will be wilted. That is a response to not having enough water. Metabolism. Plants metabolize like you and I. Plants collect products of biochemical reactions. They metabolize like you and I do, but do a lot different process and break down different things. So plants will create sugar in photosynthesis, where they make this energy. And then in the cellular respiration, this is a process where plants take that sugar, which is a long-term energy storage, and break that sugar down into energy and allow energy to be released. We'll talk about photosynthesis and respiration about halfway through. Plants need to digest, where there's a conversion of large insoluble food molecules to smaller soluble molecules. Assimilation, Plants will convert raw material into cell substances. Plants need to adapt to the environment. They're living organisms, so they need to respond when different things are happening. Natural selection adapts plants to their environment. Plants are made up of a group of atoms like you and I. It's just a bunch of charged and neutral and not charged molecules forming together to form the organism, a plant. So plants are made up of atoms, including carbon. So now that the carbon is put together, how do we name them? And that goes right into the next process. So how do we name an organism? So first, here's a fun story. So this summer, my nephew, he's about 6 years old. He and my dad are walking down to the pond, and my nephew finds a little turtle that's about the size of a 50-cent piece. And they take it back to the house, get an aquarium, set my nephew up with a turtle, and they ask my nephew, what is the name of your turtle? So I'm going to ask you, what would you name this turtle? This is like a box turtle. You found a little box turtle. What would you name a box turtle like this? Okay, I'm going to assume maybe you came up with a name. I asked this question in class one other time, and someone told me they would name the turtle like Pipsqueak, or maybe you name it like Slowpoke. There's a lot of fun names. Well, here's my question. Oh, you're 7. What does a 7-year-old name a turtle? Well, in 1 week, I talked to my nephew on the phone, and my nephew said, I have a turtle, and his name's Ninja, because he's a Ninja Turtle. Pretty cute, original. And then 2 days later, my nephew told me, I have a turtle named Frank. I said, Frank? I thought his name was Ninja. He said, no, his name's Frank. And then at the end of the week, my nephew came up to me and introduced me to his turtle Socks. And I said, I thought his name was Frank. No, now it's Socks. And, but you know what? What I'm getting at is, if we all have an opportunity to name something, we might, name it differently. And in the case of a turtle, it will have 3 names in a week if you give a 7-year-old a chance to name it. Here's an animal, and this is another creature. If you recognize this, what is this animal? So this animal is commonly known as a woodchuck, or also known as a groundhog, or some people even call it a whistle pig or a land beaver. So here is something, and I'm getting at a point, and that point is, around the world, there's different regions call different things, different names. So for example, this creature, some people might call it a gopher, some people might call it a woodchuck, some people might call it a land beaver, or my favorite, a whistle pig or a whistle hog. And you know what? Depending on the region you're in, that is what it's called. So one animal can have several names or several common names. Just like in plants can have several common names. The common cattail, for example, it is known as the hot dog plant, the cattail, and Cooper's reed. Those are several names just for one plant. Depending on where that plant's found, people give it different names in that area. And those names that you give it, just those common names, basic names, those are called the common names. One plant could have 10 different common names. So in order to study the billions of different organisms living on Earth, scientists have sorted out and classified plants based on similarities and differences. The system is called plant taxonomy and features both English and Latin names for different divisions, and it's best to specify the exact plant you want by the scientific name. It is important to people to know in the commercial industry what the scientific name is, because there could be hundreds of common names. So how I look at this as, it's almost like the plant social security number. So like, for example, if your name is John Smith, there could be 20 different John Smiths. So what does the government do? It gives you a social security number that's specific to you, the person. That's what scientific names are. They are almost like a social security number. Scientific names are the exact name of the plant using either a Latin or English two-part name. No plants have the same scientific name, and plants don't have several scientific names. Plants just have one scientific name, whereas plants could have 50 different common names. Because what if you call a plant wild lettuce, and I call that plant prickly lettuce? It's just like that. So scientific naming began around the year 370 to 285 BC from Theophras. He was a Greek philosopher and naturalist and is called the father of botany. He was a pupil of Aristotle and was the first person to publish a classification of plants. Plants names are based on herbs, shrubs, trees, annual, perennials, biennials. Then, many years later, a guy by the name of Carl Linnaeus created the naming convention we use today, and that is the binomial naming system. So he created the binomial naming system of plants. So the prefix bi in science or in Latin means two. Nomial means name. So binomial means two names. All plants have a scientific name composed of two Latin names known as a genus and a species. Carl Linnaeus is still known as today as the father of taxonomy, and he created this system back in 1753, and we still use this today. So the binomial nomenclature, all species named according to the system will include the authority for the species name. What is authority? Authority is saying who named that, and what it is, it's a letter right after the scientific name. So the spearmint scientific name is Mentha spicata. The L behind the Mentha spicata means Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus is responsible for naming this plant. In a lot of the plants we have today, they have L's behind them, and it all means Linnaeus. I'll never forget in my master's thesis, I would always put down the scientific name just like Mentha spicata, and I had one of my committee members said, "Where's the power?" And I said, what do you mean by the power? He goes, the naming convention, like L. I said, what do you mean, L? He goes, it means Linnaeus. I said, oh, the guy that invented taxonomy. He goes, yeah, you need that. So, that is something I never learned in my studies. I don't know how I missed it, but that's one thing I want to point out. When you look up a scientific name, it just has the two parts, but if you ever are writing this in a scientific publication, make sure you put the letter behind it on who named it. Most of the time it's an L for Linnaeus, but not all the time. What you need to do is find your plant, Google it, and find scientific name, and the power should come up, the naming power and who named it. If you can't find it, click on several sites. Eventually you'll find who named that plant. So Carl Linnaeus wrote there's this book by Carl Linnaeus called Species Plantarum. He organized plants into 24 classes based on the number of stamens. It's convenient, but did not reflect natural relationships between species. In contrast with common names, a scientific name is used the scientific name is the same in any language and provides a unique name for that organism that two people can be sure they're referring to the same organism. Scientific naming helps locate a species in the tree of life because its two-part moniker includes species and genus, the group of species to which it belongs. Scientists who describe new species are typically the ones who come up with the name. So if I was the one that invented corn, Zia Mays would have a letter K in parentheses, K standing for keck. Whoever gets to find the species gets to name it, and then you get your name behind it or associated with it. So it's pretty cool. Nomenclature not only gives it a single unique name, but also assists in assigning a place in taxonomy based on similarities and dissimilarities with different organisms that help establish the relationship. So the scientific naming order, you go from biggest to smallest. We've learned in we should have learned in elementary school, there are two kingdoms. There's a plant kingdom, animal kingdom. So kingdom is the biggest, then phylum is smaller than a kingdom. Class is even smaller than a phylum. Order is smaller. Family is even smaller. Genus is very small, and then species is specific to that species, like the scientific name. So if you look over the side, you can see kingdom. Here's the plant kingdom. There's a lot of them. Phylum is less. Class is even less. Order, family. Families are getting a lot smaller and specific. Genus are getting even smaller, and species, there's only one. To remember the classification of the different levels, I use a mnemonic device. A mnemonic device is a sentence or a phrase that helps you remember something. So, for example, if you want to remember the Great Lakes, remember the word homes. Homes, H stands for Huron, O stands for Ontario, M stands for Michigan, E stands for Erie, S stands for Superior. If you're a musician, when you're first learning treble clef, you might remember an expression, every good boy deserves fudge, to remember that. So to remember the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, remember the expression, King Philip comes over for great spaghetti, or King Philip came over for great spaghetti. That is how you remember the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Or someone else has one, do kings play chess on fine green silk? I just remember King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So here is corn. I'll show you how corn is broken down. So corn belongs in the plant kingdom. Plant kingdom is also called plantae, but corn belongs in the plant kingdom. Then their phylum is Magnophyllida. Class is Liliaceae. Order Cyperalis. Family, it's in the grass family. That's very specific. So up here in the plant family, all plants are in the plant family. The trees in that. And then down here, when you get into corn's family, grass. That's what corn's a grass. It's different than trees in that. So we're getting more specific than the actual genus of corn is Zea, and the actual species is maize. So the binomial naming convention says the name is Zea mays. Genus is Zea, species is maize, scientific name Zea mays. In the plant kingdom, there are over 275,000 species. All plants are included in one kingdom, which is the plant kingdom, which is broken down in smaller and smaller divisions. Whether they circulate fluids like rainwater through their bodies or they absorb them from moisture that surrounds them. So like mosses and algae need to live in water and absorb it. Other plants are able to pull water out of the soil and run it through their bodies. However, they reproduce by spores or different seeds and their size and structure. Phylum, plants are divided into this category based on whether or not the plant bears or produces seeds. In the phylum, they're either vascular or non-vascular. There are over 250,000 plants in this category. So kingdom 275, phylum 250, getting smaller. Class 235,000 species, so getting smaller yet. You went from 275 in kingdom to 250 phylum, 235 class, and then order 18,000. You take a huge drop. But let's get back to class. Class, plants are divided in two types of classes. You have your angiosperms, which are plants that produce flowers, and you have your gymnosperms, plants that do not produce flowers. Angiosperms are basically any plant we can think of, green beans, corn, trees that have flowers, all of that. Gymnosperms, well, not all trees, like oak tree and that. Gymnosperms are your conifers. They have a gymnosperm as a naked seed. That would be like a fir tree. Subclass from your class, you have a subclass. You have your dicotyledonnae and monocotyledonnae, which is monocots and dicots. Dicots are broadleaves that have, they're plants that have two little embryonic leaves when they're first growing. Monocots only have one cotyledon. That is one little baby embryonic leaf when it's growing. So plants that come out of the ground with just one leaf is a monocot. Plants that have two of those seed leaves coming out of the ground is a dicot. Or broadleaves are dicots, monocots are grasses. Grasses are monocots, broadleaves are dicots. Then you have order. There's over 18,000 species in order. It's a group of related plant families classified in the order which they have been developed from an ancestor. What is their vegetative structure? What is their reproductive structure? There's over 18 species, and the names of orders end in ALES. Then you're going into families. There's only 3,000 species, so that's even smaller. Each order is divided into families. There's different botanical features. They're related with similar flower parts, like the rose family has plums, apples, strawberries, because they have similar flowers. Or like you have the grass family, where all grasses are very similar. The grass family is Poaceae. The names of the family end in ACEA. So you have like Poaceae, Lamiaceae, Convolvaceae, Apiaceae, all of those, Chenopodiaceae, the goosefoot family, all of those end in the ACA. There are over 3,500 species. Then you have a genus. That's the part of the plant that gives its familiarity. Like you give a plant, a poppy plant, Papiover. This is a plant's group name. All plants having the same generic name are said to belong in the same genus and have similar characteristics. The name of the genus should be written with the capital letter. There are over 500 species in a genus. Then finally, there is the species themselves. There is only one of that species. Species is only one. This is the highest level that defines an individual plant. Often the name will describe some aspect of that plant, the color of the flowers, the size, the shape, or it may be named after the place it is found. Together, the genus and species refer to only one plant, and they are used to identify that particular plant. The species name is an adjective that describes the genus. So like alba means white. So Quercus alba means white oak, because alba means white. And I'm wondering if Quercus is the oak. A lot of the oak trees have that Quercus. Rubia means red, so Acer rubia means red maple. The name of the species should be written after the genus name with small letters, no capital. And you should italicize the species name. And if you're writing it on a piece of paper and you can't obviously italicize when you're writing, just underline it. Underline means italicizing. So plant classification. All living organisms are given a two-word Latin name, which means a species name. There's only one scientific name per species, whereas some plants could have 50 common names. You only have one scientific name. Many common names may be given to the same species. Like Descentic Carilla, many common names is like Dutchman's breeches, little boy's breeches, monk's hood, boys and girls soldier cap, white heart. So there are so many common names, but yet there's only the one scientific name. Plantain has over 300 common names, or one common name may be applied to the different number of species. Monk's hood is common for Decenticarilla and for Economa species, which is a different family. So the naming convention is written down. The coding and naming is written in the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. That's a book that has all the standardized rules, and it's agreed that Linnaeus is a starting point for names. A lot of names have the power of L, which L stands for Linnaeus. Rules are revised at periodic International Botanical Congress. The ICBN has been translated into English, French, and German. Requires 2 steps to officially recognize new plant species. DNA sequence data must be deposited in a public database like GenBank. The author must designate a type specimen that's deposited in a herbarium. A cultivated plant has an origin or selection that is primarily due to the intentional human activity, and that may be deliberate or accidental by hybrid, like crossbreeding of plants. That could be from a wild population. These factors makes these plants unsuitable for ICBN and require an independent catalog. Like there are some weeds out there. Red root pigweed, Palmer amaranth, and water hemp. They're all in the same family, and they are water hemp and Palmer amaranth have been believed to have like crossbred and created a new species, and they're thinking about renaming it. It's not like a new species as a whole, but it's a hybrid because it's like a cross species. ICBN designates classified plants as taxa. They are grouped in nested ranks. ICNCP uses 2 classification terms, cultivar and group. Most cultigens have a Latin name governed by the ICBN. They are grouped by use to humans. Group names can be used for any trait, flower color, growth habit, chromosome number. Phyloco, new data in the field of molecular systematics changes our knowledge of relationships. If a taxon is reclassified, its name and rank changes hierarchy. Ranked category like genus and family are not mandatory. Power, finally, the power is a letter after a scientific name. A common power is the letter L for Linnaeus. But like I said, if you go and find a new plant species and they name it after you, it will have the letter of your last name, the first letter of your last name after it, signifying you named it. So let's go back and see what we learned. Down here is an order showing the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Species is the absolute. This is corn. So plant kingdom's very broad, and as you go down the line, it gets narrow all the way down to that specific species, like corn or ZMAs. With that, hopefully you enjoyed today's lecture. Make sure you take the reading quiz for this unit. Make sure for next time you read what's posted in Canvas and take the reading quiz. Make sure you do the homework for today. Make sure you did the homework for last class period. So make sure you're being up to date on the homework. If you have any questions, please call or email me. And today's homework has already been posted. So make sure you do that, and then also make sure you go and look at the reading for next class period and read it and do the reading quiz on that. So with that being said, have a great morning, have a great afternoon, or have a great evening, and see you in class.